The rack. The rack was a torture device used in medieval Europe mainly during interrogations and prison punishments. The victim was tied to a large wooden frame with ropes attached to the wrists and ankles. As executioners turned rollers on the sides, the ropes slowly pulled the body in opposite directions. The stretching caused extreme pain in the muscles and joints while making movement almost impossible. Although the rack was often used to force confessions rather than kill immediately, severe use of the device could cause permanent injuries, broken joints, internal damage, and eventually death. Some prisoners died from shock, exhaustion, or injuries caused by prolonged stretching. The punishment became one of the most infamous symbols of medieval torture because of its slow and deliberate nature, where the victim remained conscious while the suffering increased gradually over time. Brazen Bull. The Brazen Bull was a legendary execution device said to have been created in ancient Greece. It was designed as a large hollow metal bull with a door on the side where a prisoner would be locked inside. Once sealed, a fire was lit underneath the metal structure, slowly heating the bull from the outside. According to historical stories, pipes inside the device changed the victim's screams into sounds resembling the roar of an animal, making the punishment even more terrifying for people nearby. As the metal became hotter, the trapped person would suffer from extreme heat and a lack of breathable air inside the enclosed space. The temperature continued rising until the body could no longer survive the intense conditions. Ancient writers described the punishment as both an execution and a public display meant to spread fear. Although historians debate how often the Brazen Bull was actually used, the story survived for centuries because of how horrifying and symbolic the device appeared in historical accounts. The crushing punishment. Crushing punishments were used in different forms across ancient and medieval societies, usually to force confessions or create fear through slow suffering. One of the most famous methods involved placing heavy stones or weights onto a prisoner's chest, while more pressure was added gradually over time. In some historical accounts from South and Southeast Asia, trained elephants were also used in executions and punishments. Rulers sometimes ordered elephants to crush prisoners beneath their feet in front of large crowds as a public display of power and authority. Elephants were chosen because they symbolized royal strength and control in many kingdoms. Some stories describe specially trained elephants carrying out executions slowly on command rather than instantly. Public punishments involving elephants became especially feared because of the size and intelligence of the animals themselves. Historical rulers used these spectacles not only to punish criminals, but also to intimidate enemies and remind the public of the ruler's absolute power. Scaphism. Scaphism was an ancient punishment described in old writings about the Persian Empire. According to historical accounts, the victim was trapped tightly between two small boats or wooden frames with only the head, hands, and feet exposed outside. The person was then force-fed food and milk before being left outdoors near water, under the heat of the sun for long periods. Over time, the combination of heat, exposure, dehydration, infection, insects, and complete helplessness slowly destroyed the body. Ancient stories describe insects gathering around the trapped victim, while sickness and weakness became worse day after day. Death was said to happen very slowly, which is why Scaphism became remembered as one of the cruelest punishments ever described in ancient history. The head crusher. The head crusher was a torture device used mainly during medieval interrogations in parts of Europe. The victim's head was placed between a metal cap above and a pressure plate below the chin. A screw mechanism was then tightened slowly, increasing pressure around the skull and jaw over time. The punishment was designed to force confessions through fear and pain rather than immediate execution. What made the device especially terrifying was its slow mechanical nature. Prisoners remained fully conscious while the pressure gradually increased with every turn of the screw. Historical stories about the head crusher spread widely through prison legends, museums, and later horror media, turning it into one of the most recognizable symbols of medieval torture. The Gibbet Cage. The Gibbet Cage was a terrifying public punishment used mainly in parts of Europe during the medieval and early modern periods. It involved placing a criminal inside a metal cage and hanging it high above roads, bridges, or town entrances where everyone could see it. In many cases, the person had already been executed before being placed inside, but some prisoners were left alive in the cage for a period of time. The hanging bodies served as warnings to travelers and local citizens about what could happen to criminals. The cages were usually shaped to hold the human body tightly, making movement nearly impossible. Victims left alive suffered from hunger, dehydration, harsh weather, and complete exposure while crowds watched from below. Even after death, the remains often stayed hanging for weeks or months as part of the punishment itself. The Gibbet Cage became one of the darkest symbols of old public justice because it turned punishment into a permanent display of fear and authority. The public cage. The public cage was a punishment used in some medieval towns where prisoners were locked inside small wooden or metal cages placed in crowded public areas. The cages were often too small for comfortable movement, forcing the person to stand or sit in painful positions for long periods. Unlike private imprisonment, the punishment was meant to expose the prisoner to constant public humiliation, while crowds watched, mocked, or ignored them throughout the day. In severe cases, prisoners were left inside the cage for many days with little food, water, or protection from harsh weather. Extreme heat, cold, starvation, dehydration, sickness, and exhaustion slowly weakened the body over time. Some victims eventually died from exposure and neglect rather than direct violence, which made the punishment especially feared in older public justice systems. The Heretic Fork. The Heretic Fork was a metal torture device used mainly during religious interrogations in medieval Europe. It was attached around the neck with one sharp end pressed beneath the chin and the other pointed toward the chest. The prisoner could not lower their head without the spikes digging painfully into the skin, forcing them to remain upright and awake for long periods. What made the punishment especially cruel was the exhaustion it created over time. Even small movements like nodding off to sleep, coughing, or leaning forward could cause sharp injuries. Prisoners often became weak from lack of rest, pain, and stress while guards continued watching them. The Heretic's Fork became infamous because it turned basic human actions like sleeping and moving into constant sources of fear. The Pear of Anguish. The Pear of Anguish was a metal device often associated with medieval torture stories and interrogations. It was shaped somewhat like a pear and designed with metal sections that could slowly expand outward using a screw mechanism. According to historical accounts and later legends, the device was inserted into the mouth or other body openings before being gradually opened from the inside. The punishment caused severe internal injuries and intense pain as the metal sections expanded further over time. In many stories, the device was used more for torture, humiliation, or forcing confessions rather than immediate execution. Historians still debate how commonly it was truly used, but the disturbing design and terrifying reputation helped turn the Pear of Anguish into one of the most infamous symbols of medieval punishment. The saw execution. The saw execution was a brutal punishment used in some parts of the ancient and medieval world. The victim was usually hung upside down by the legs, while executioners used a large saw to cut through the body slowly from below upward. Hanging upside down was believed to delay death because blood continued flowing toward the brain, allowing the person to remain conscious longer during the punishment. The execution was designed to be both painful and public, often carried out as a warning to others. Death eventually happened from extreme blood loss, shock, and severe physical trauma as the cutting continued. Historical stories about the saw execution survived for centuries because of how terrifying and cruel the method appeared compared to many other forms of punishment from the same period.